So, general data protection regulation. What is it, Brian?
All about the information companies have on me as a citizen, for example, that identifies me, and whether they're looking after it securely, keeping it safe, and making sure that it doesn't breach, i.e. leak out and go to places it shouldn't be.
Whose responsibility is this?
So this is a piece of European legislation which is being brought in to replace the Data Protection Act. That came into force in 1998, and the way in which we've used data over that period of time has vastly outgrown the Data Protection Act with the advances of modern technology. And the idea behind the General Data Protection Regulations is to bring our data protection law up to speed so that it's fit for purpose and able to properly deal with the technology challenges that we have now.
And Keith, has this been a surprise for everyone, or has this been something that's been a long time coming?
It shouldn't have been a surprise because it's actually been coming for 2 years. But in reality, I have to say that, and I've expressed this personally to the ICO, that I think their publicity campaign has been abysmal. They have not put anything like the effort into publicising it that I think they should. And there are a number of catch-alls which I think are going to catch people out. One example being, Katie mentioned about changing technology, but also it's a step backwards too, because it also applies to paper documents just as much as it does to electronic documents. And also, I think, is the realisation that it does apply. It's not an IT thing. It's a company thing. It's a company culture thing. Absolutely. And I think that's important that people grasp that.
I think the challenge lies for a lot of small businesses. I have to consider data for my staff, data for my clients because of the nature of the business, and data we hold to conduct our business. And I think the biggest challenge is, and Katie alluded to this, it's taken a long time to catch up, and we're all a bit fed up with the emails we receive and the text messages and the phone calls. It does strike me it's perhaps a little too late. I think the other challenge is interpretations of the law and regulations seem to vary from one individual or one organisation to the next.
Where's the permission aspect? Because there is some of this where you can ask someone and say, is that okay? And as long as they say yes, or they sign where they need to sign, and is that all sorted once that's happened?
Not really. There's two aspects to how the employee needs to be involved in GDPR. One is their own personal data the company holds, and the company needs to give them a privacy notice to say, this is what we hold, this is why we'll hold it, with all the legitimate purposes or whatever. And consent might come into some of that. Some of it you need, by mandate of law, you have to have certain amounts of data to actually pay people. So you've got to have that data from that operating point of view. But a bigger area for me is the working practices that every employee is involved in. And it was you and I were talking about, the laptop left in a car or at home, or emailing work, even if you're quite senior, emailing work home to your home computer to work on that evening. How secure is the data when it's there, and how secure is it in the transfer between the two places?
But it's okay to do that though, is it? The whole copying your emails?
Provided you've got it fully IT secure and data secure, then yes, you could say that's okay. But rolling that back to the start, you have to examine what happens in your business, almost forensically, to make sure that something can't go wrong with something like that.
And I think it's important to say as well that the employee privacy policy, and you're quite right, that has to be signed and dated, I would suggest, by every employee and kept on file. Has to be separate from the contract of employment. It can't be part of your contract of employment, that it's hidden away in there somewhere about privacy. It has to be a distinct policy.
I just want to interject there. I think this is coming around to one of, again, the sort of hot topics on GDPR is the issue of consent. Because this is, again, another area that's moved on from the Data Protection Act, and that is that consent now has to be freely given, specific, informed and unambiguous. Now, the key word there that's causing the most difficulty is freely given. And certainly from an employment perspective, there is an imbalance in the employee-employer relationship such that consent really can very rarely be freely given. So employers now need to look at relying on a different lawful basis and can't just rely on the consent that has always been in the employment contract, which is why there's such a refocusing now on looking and identifying the real reasons why we're doing this. And more broadly, from a marketing perspective, and perhaps Nigel, you might have some input on this, but you have to make sure that where you've obtained consent in the past, for processing individuals' data, perhaps for marketing purposes, that the consent that you've had before meets that new definition, or if not, you're having to go out and consider doing it again, which again is causing businesses a bit of a headache at the moment.
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's two sides, isn't there? There is a challenge there in that data. I think a lot of companies have historically built up data from networking, from e-marketing, and maybe they purchase it from sources. But I think there's also an opportunity that comes within the work. A lot of the clients we see have an enormous database of varying degrees of quality. And we would generally advise them that less is more. So why not boil down your 10,000 pieces of data into 500 or 600 that's actually good, relevant, current, up-to-date, ticks all the right compliance boxes. So maybe turn that challenge into opportunity where you can.
I think that's one of the positives about GDPR. It's making businesses get their act right and be fully secure, looking after whatever it is that they hold.
I fully agree. I think it does. And I think as well, it is putting more control back in the hands of us as individuals. And hey, I can look at this two ways. As a business, I can find that some of the procedures are now a bit restrictive. But if I look at it as a private individual, hey, I quite like the idea that I can stop you processing something, or that if you process it against my will, I can actually get the authorities to investigate that. And so I think broadly it's to be welcome. And I really, not just to train this and live and breathe it, but because I do generally believe that in 5 years' time we'll be sitting around a table like this wondering why we ever did it differently. And I think it's just that change is difficult, because any cultural change is difficult to embrace.
What are the things that are going to catch people out, even on what you may think are the most, probably your own companies, the most efficient companies for preparation around GDPR? What's going to catch us out here?
If I can, I would say two things. One is making sure you have a website privacy policy that's GDPR compliant. That's absolutely critical. And the other is that you don't have any pre-ticked boxes for consent on your web form.
So it's the area of the web that's probably, because everyone uses it.
Yes, I think so, but also picking up on what Keith is saying there, I think from my experience, and I've been assisting a large number of organisations with their compliance projects, and one of the most common kind of mistakes, if you like, that I'm coming across is the privacy notices and the information that needs to be provided in those. So that would be privacy notices externally for your clients and customers that you would display on your website, but also internally for employees as well, because it does have to be very prescriptive now. For example, if you're relying on your own legitimate interests as your ground for processing data, you actually need to specify what those legitimate interests are specifically. If you're sharing information with third parties, you need to state who those third parties are and provide that information. And that's something that I'm seeing a lot of organisations don't seem to realise the extent of the information that has to be provided. I think also having a full understanding of the different types of data that they're processing. And we touched on this briefly at the beginning, but it isn't the obvious things that will catch people out, like employee files or customer databases. It's simple things like, for example, even the simple key fob, which many people use to access buildings and properties. That in itself is recording personal data about an individual, for example, their movements. And it's these little kind of nuances that perhaps don't jump out at you, but that you still need to think, okay, what is my lawful ground for processing that information about those employees?
The cost on business for this, what's it been like for you, Nigel?
It's not inconsiderable. I mean, we're an SME, which I know it's quite a broad description, but our costs for compliance, both in the lead up and ongoing, will run into certainly in excess of tens of thousands. So it's not inconsiderable. Whether there's a benefit that goes with that in the longer term, I think my concern about costs and process is it is what it is, and we'll do what's necessary. I think that maybe there is a concern that we're paying the price for some poor practice by other organisations. I think that we're all aware that the amount of calls and emails and text messages we get that we haven't asked for has started to upset the public on whole, and maybe there's a case for saying, could some of those companies contribute towards the cost so that we don't have to?
What about the companies that they deal with? So, for example, your suppliers, the HMRC, people that have got data like security camera data. Is that included? What about personal details that maybe within your company that you want to protect from other people getting hold of?
I think from an HR perspective, it's not just the retention and security, it's where you send it to and, and the reasons you send it there, and is it secure when it's there?
Yes.
And needing not just an undertaking, but as good as fireproof guarantee as you can from your data processor out there. The obvious one is the payroll bureau, for example.
Yes.
But if you send the data anywhere, I mean, in advising HR cases with clients, I'm trading information, data, opinion, even some copy documents. And part of my tech upgrade is to have a UK-based file drop, cloud-based system, so that they can go and get the document when I tell them it's there, and not send it by email.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and that's something we've introduced. I think the challenge you described, both with suppliers and customers, and I suspect we're all guilty of this, we've all worked in a certain way for a very long time, and some of our clients and suppliers we may have dealt with for 8, 9, 10 years, but we're having to be very firm with them. I'm saying, I'm sorry, we can no longer move data in that way or work in this way. Oh, well, it's okay, you know, we've worked together for so many years. I'm really sorry, but no. And I think going back to the earlier point about potential risk, it could be in that example where you think it's okay because it's a tried and trusted relationship, but actually you've got to stand firm and say, sorry, no, it has to be this way. That's quite hard.
In terms of a data breach, 90% of the time it happens through human error. And quite often not maliciously, it's accidental, unintended, but it happens. And I think some of the caseload that's going to happen is when people complain about data breaches. And part of the rules of GDPR is if you know you've had a data breach, you have to tell the people involved.
Okay, but human error is no defence, presumably?
No.
And I mean, I think Brian's quite right there, because people think of data breaches in terms of your computer being hacked or whatever, and that's quite an obvious data breach. But actually CCing people in an email is a data breach if they've not given you express permission to share their email addresses with other people. And so people are going to have to get much more used to using BCC in emails rather than CC. But that can have an opposite effect, of course, because sometimes you want to know who else is in that email.
So you can't do email introductions anymore?
Technically, no. In reality, I would say you can do it once. So you could do it once to that person, but I think if you kept on doing it, someone would have a case then for actually going to the ICO and saying, this is a data breach, I want you to investigate this. But back in the paper world as well, if I'm invoicing lots of clients and I put an invoice in the wrong envelope, that's a data breach. And so it can be as simple as that. And what I'm trying to get over to all my clients especially is set up a data breach register, however minor something is, record it in the data breach register, record the fact it happened. No one's going to throw the book at you because it happened, but record it happened, so that if it is investigated at a later date, at least you can turn around and say, yes, we knew about that, we actually recorded it in our data breach register here.
And I'm not sure if we've covered it, but actually there is a requirement to notify the ICO of data breaches within 72 hours, which is, it sounds like a reasonable amount of time, but actually if you think that a data breach, which is likely to cause, you know, potential harm to data subjects, may be as simple as an employee sending an email out to the wrong person, you know, you're then reliant on that employee to feed that breach back up through the organisation to the right person to then make that decision on whether or not the ICO needs to be notified. So one of the real crucial messages here is making sure, if you're a business and you're listening to this, that you have adequate data handling policy in place or a data breach policy in place that sets out the processes that your organisation should follow and your employees should follow, so that first of all they can recognise if they have made a data breach, and secondly so they know the reporting processes for reporting that, and encouraging employees that it's okay, you know, this does happen from time to time. The important thing is that you notify somebody about it.
With any procedure like this, particularly in a large organisation, is actually test it. Yeah, don't just assume that that is what we would do. Actually simulate it and test it and say, because you know what, I would far rather fail on the test than fail when that's actually 10,000 people's records that have just gone out the door.
Well, interesting conversation. I'm sure we're all absolutely ready. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.